Welcome everyone for the final keynote of the day, 2020. This is the final leg of Against All Odds Startup Summit by Freshworks for Startups. We concluded this followed by 3 more summits across different regions of the world. So Europe, before that we had North America, before that Asia Pacific, and the first one was India edition. For this fireside chat, the final fireside chat of the day, we have Philippe Botteri, partner at Accel, and we have Arun Mani, President, Freshworks Europe. They will be talking about startup opportunities in the post-pandemic world. As usual, keep your questions coming in. We'll put it to the panel and they'll take it as we find time. So without any further ado, over to you, Arun.
Thanks, Ahmed. I really appreciate that. And I'm super excited to host the last session. And like all big conferences, the last session they ask, who do we want to be the speaker? Usually it's the celebrity speaker. And this time we said, Philippe is our celebrity. If you don't know Philippe, quick introduction. Philippe has been with Accel for more than a decade, close to a decade now. And if you haven't heard his name, you definitely have heard the companies he has invested in, like Docusign, Algolia, Doctolib, Blablacar, Peopledoc, but most importantly, UiPath. I think the first decacorn from Europe. So Philippe is a man of the magic touch, and Philippe, really appreciate you joining us and taking the time to actually share your insights with close to 1,000 founders who are probably listening. So please introduce yourself, like 2 to 3 minutes, explaining your journey. How did you end up in venture investing? What's your path that took us here in a very short 3 minutes? And tell us about yourself.
Thank you, Arun, for all your kind words. Very happy to be here today. And hello to everyone who is on the event. So I'm Philippe. So as you probably all guessed from my accent, I'm based in London, but from the other side of the channels. I'm a partner for Accel here in London. So as you know, Accel is a global firm. So we have offices in Silicon Valley, India, and Europe. And we do invest in early stage companies. So hopefully, we'll end up investing in several of the people in the companies who are attending this event. So my journey to venture, started with a passion for tech. So I started my career with McKinsey in the Paris office, and I was lucky because it was in the late 90s, so I had the chance to work for startups. I mean, it was one of this very unique time where McKinsey was serving startup. I mean, the crazy day of the dot-coms. When the bubble burst, I focused more on software clients, which led me to move to the West Coast in the Palo Alto office. And when I got my green card, I moved into, left McKinsey, moved into venture, so joined Bessemer Venture Partners in 2006. Helped them build their cloud practice. So it was really the early days of SaaS. I mean, 2006. If you go to my blog, Cracking the Code, you will see that my first post was actually why I disagree with Tony Zingale on SaaS. And he was the CEO of a famous software company, Mercury Interactive at the time. And his first keynote was why SaaS was going nowhere. So that was interesting. And then invested in several Gen 1 SaaS companies like Cornerstone On Demand, Eloqua, Intact. And then in 2011, I saw what was happening in Europe. It was very exciting, early days, moved back. I wanted to be on a global platform and wanted with a team that I really like. And I love the partnership at Accel, and they had the global platform I was looking for. So I moved back to London in 2011. Been there for 9 years, and I can't believe how the growth of the cloud ecosystem has been in the past decade. I mean, and this year was really big year for me because seeing Europe creating the first European SaaS decacorn with UiPath, I think that was a big achievement. We're celebrating our 20 years in Europe. We had a lot of events, physical events planned. Everything had to be canceled. But I think this is the biggest gift we could have ever hoped for to celebrate our anniversary.
This is a fantastic, that story itself, it resonates very well with our theme against all odds. When SaaS was food, you basically said, no, I'm going to bet big on it. And here you go, 10 years later, you have a decacorn. Now, we see amazing, I would say, momentum in SaaS. And just this week, if you see the Snowflake and Frog and IPOs. So are we at the peak, or the best is yet to come for SaaS?
Well, I think there is a difference between the public market valuations and and the ecosystem as a whole. I think for the ecosystem, I think the trend that we're seeing right now have been just accelerated by COVID and work from home, but they are here to stay. They're not going to go away. So if you look at the market cap of SaaS companies, that's grown exponentially in the past 10 years, and I will expect it to grow the same way in the next 10 years. Now, as far as the multiple is concerned, our company is going to be valued 100 times run rate. I don't know if that's really sustainable.
No, I hear you, and this is this is where you see all kinds of the arguments, and but overall cloud as a trend is going to be there for getting the valuations. In terms of, you said you brought up COVID, the elephant in the room, and they said it's accelerating. Now, I want to start with the founder itself. Founders are a special breed of people with a lot of optimism, ambition, perseverance, you name it. But what more does it take to be successful, especially for founders who are, most of our listeners today are in the seed stage, in that stage. What more does it take for them to be successful now? What do you look for?
So that's an interesting question. I mean, if you look at I've been through, this is a third economic crisis that I'm going through with the .com 2008 and now 2020. And at the beginning of the crisis, my advice to founders was just try to preserve your cash, because you don't know how the future is going to be. And if you look at the past crisis, they were all downward for a period of time. And so you needed to hunker down, reduce your costs, and survive the crisis. But actually, for this crisis is different. It's different for tech companies, because this is a crisis which has a K form. K form in the sense that some business have been going down and some business have been going up. And the business that have been going down is anything around retail, travel, hospitality. It's really a bad time to be in these sectors. But everything around software, collaboration, online payments, e-commerce, e-health, all these sectors have really accelerated. And so my advice to founders today is, you never know how tomorrow is going to be, but tomorrow could offer a wealth of opportunities or could be a disaster, and you need to be prepared for both. And that is the real challenge of this environment, is that you need to keep accelerating when you see opportunities, but you don't want to lean too far over your ski tips, because at some point you may have to really pull back. And I think founders will have to navigate this world of uncertainty. So I think I would say that as a general framework. Now, one of the things which I think is super important in terms of how founders should think about positioning their offering today is really to think about the ROI for the customers. Mm-hmm. Because for a lot of the customers, it's still a pretty bad time out there. And therefore, the IT spend, there is a big budget for IT spend. It's not, it's been cut a bit, but it's still there. But it's really going to be prioritized on solutions that can deliver very strong ROI. And so when you think about talking to your customers and your go-to-market, I think it is wise to really build your ROI model and think how you can explain to your customers why, in 3, 6, or 8 months, he's going to see a 5 to 10x return on the money that he's giving you. And the inspirational sale, doesn't work as well, when times are tough.
That's a very interesting point. I want to put a pin on that. So I want to come back to the ROI for customers. But I also want to go back to the earlier you said, talking about cash preservation and, and because of kind of the volatile environment, right? Now, everybody's trying to read the tea leaves saying, like, is this the new normal? What is the new normal? How long will it last? And so on. And there is so many points of views. And you being in the business of predicting and investing based on that, want to hear your take on it. And you also started mentioning about the verticals that are actually being successful. And now I want to also ask you about people who are actually in other verticals, or verticals that are, if I categorize as like a hot verticals like Zoom, or collaboration is in a hot vertical, or payments is another one. But then there are verticals that are suffering. So what would be your advice for the verticals in the middle? Like what verticals do you say is like kind of a status quo, but are most impacted by this, what you're talking about, the ROI for customers, where the pitches? So 2 questions. One is, how do you see this whole scene unfolding? Your own point of view. I know there is so many points of views. It's difficult, but share yours. And then the hot ones are easy. The tough ones are also easy. What about the founders in the middle? How they should be thinking about creating ROI-driven story, and what verticals are there?
Sure. Yeah. So on your first question, how do I see the future? I mean, it's $1 million question. I mean, my perspective is that it's going to get worse before it gets better. I think there's going to be a lot of volatility between now and and the beginning of next year because of the second wave that we're starting to see in Europe. Because of the uncertainty around the US election, and there's a high risk that this election are going to be contested one way or another, which is going to add a lot of volatility. There's still some tension, of course, with China. So the overall world, I think, is a bit on the edge right now, and I think we'll need to wait for the beginning of 2021 for things to settle down. And I do think that by that time, there should be more, potentially some vaccine, more drugs that are effective against COVID, potentially some areas reaching level of herd immunity, which is going to, limit the spread. So my guess is that in Q1, potentially Q2 next year, things are going to get better. But maybe I'm too optimistic.
That keeps going. And the second question: what about founders who are caught in the middle sectors, not too hot, not also too much impacted, but in the middle?
Yeah, so that's I think that's a fair it's a fair view of the world, right? The world is divided in 3 groups. There is a 20% that are seeing a very wild acceleration. There is the 60-70% that are doing okay, and then there's the 10% that are really suffering. I mean in the startup tech ecosystem. I think if you're in the middle, the one thing which is the most important is that you're probably seeing a deceleration in your growth rate, and what's important is not to optimize your cash to go through this period, is to optimize the cash to rebound when things are going to get better. Because if you look at the financing environment right now, it's very driven by growth, and so if your growth rate is not where it should be, it's going to be pretty hard to fundraise. So you want to make sure that you can go through the crisis, even if your growth rate is lower than what you can do. But then when you start to reaccelerate, you want to have enough cash to get to the growth rate that is going to enable you to raise the round that you need to get to the next stage. So that was one advice I would give. I think the second advice is to try and find your ways toward the light, right? Even if you're in an area which is so it's not too bad but not great, I'm sure you can find some of your customer segments which are actually doing very well. And so the idea is just concentrate, for example, if you're serving 10 sectors but one of your sector is e-commerce, I would triple down on e-commerce right now because all these companies are really doing very well. And I would disregard some of the other segments which are not, or industries which are not doing that well. So it's all about, kind of finding your ray of light and really pounding and investing in this area, and wait for the rest to get better before you diversify again.
I really like that, finding your ray of light and doubling down. And the themes emerging are preserving cash and that. Now, typically, the VC, formula is all about growth. Let's hyper growth, and Reid Hoffman make it very famous, blitzscaling and all that stuff. Now, what's the theme of the day now? Because is it still growth at all costs, or is it slow down, double down? What is it? What is the framework that you look the world through?
Well, I think it's still very growth oriented, but it's profitable growth. In a sense that, if your customer payback is 2.5 years, this is not the time to really start to invest, because you're going to burn a lot of cash and it's not very efficient. But if you can grow profitably with a payback, which is within a year, maybe 18 months, and you can go fast, just do it, because there is a ton of capital sitting on the sideline waiting to finance business like this. So this is not a time to slow down if you see the opportunities and you can grow. But it's not the time to be crazy and burn a lot of cash if your metrics are not very efficient.
Actually, go ahead.
No, because the market is very selective right now. So either you're in the have or you're in the have not. If you're in the have, then you have as much capital as you want and the multiples are very high. But if you're in the have not, then it's a very different story. Like, people don't want to bet that things are going to change and things are going to improve, because the environment is such that it's very hard to improve things. When in a more normative environment, people will say, well, you know what, at the right price, I can take the risk that things are going to improve. In this environment, it's a much harder bet.
And it's very interesting that that's a good point. I want to just go a little deeper on the customer payback, right? If I think about it, in a post-GDPR world, already the cost of customer acquisition has become a little bit more challenging. And, we have to go to the conferences and so on. You can't do the cold calls and emails that easily. Now, on top of it, they just added coronavirus. Now, there are so many brilliant ideas out there, super duper companies out there. How do they bring effectively the customer payback down? What other interesting ideas and things that you're seeing some of your investment portfolio applying to make sure the payback stays within the 12 months or even 18 months in this new world?
Well, so one of the benefits that we've seen from COVID is that it has reduced a lot of discretionary spend. So a lot of travel, a lot of physical events, where actually the ROI on the physical events sometimes was marginal. Everything's been canceled. Everything's moved online. People don't travel. So you have a lot more resources that you can use, both in terms of time, of people time, and in terms of money as well. And you can invest them efficiently. So I would say you're losing on one end, but you're gaining a lot on the other. And so overall, for me, the companies that I've seen successful are the ones that have been able to actually, leverage all this extra capacity and put it to good use. And for that means that they need to have to iron out their sales processes, because when everything is online, there is no room for mistake. And so that's, I think, what separates the great companies from the others, has been their ability to really perfect their sales and marketing processes and their go-to-market. Because to some extent, if you look at COVID, it is a weird virus which kind of just target the weakness of the body. So if you have a specific weakness, it's going to show, and that's why people are showing different symptoms, right? And I think for companies, it is exactly the same. COVID is really showing companies their weaknesses. And whenever a process is breaking because you're working online and work from home, that means that your process was not good. And so it actually forces you to really iron everything out, make everything perfect. And I think when companies are going to come out of this and go into a world where there's going to be, travel and events, etc., I think they're going to be more efficient because they have learned a lot during this period.
This is a very good insight. So it's again going by the hard things about hard things. It's like a project mode versus process mode. It's very interesting. Companies which have a mature processes, especially when they go suddenly remote working and everything and whatever is documented, fine-tuned, they have a good possibility to both preserve cash, be effective in their customer payback on customer acquisition, and overall it strengthens them, assuming they have a product market fit and they have a good unit economics. Is that a good way to summarize?
Yeah, that's a good way. And we had several very late stage companies in our portfolio that have actually gone from burning cash to be profitable during COVID. And so I think for several companies, COVID was a very good catalyst to cut all the extra costs and really focus on the essential and drive the business profitably, and without still maintaining the same growth rate or even higher growth rate. So it's all about efficiency. It's not about kind of reducing the volume or cutting down.
It's it's amazing how the theme is consistent to all the founders who are listening. It's all about efficiency and preserving cash, coming from the man himself. This is very valuable. I want to pivot now from that aspect to the size of the ambition itself. One of the key things I always hear about European startups is they think European level and often get stuck in the country they're starting, especially if it's a bigger country like France or Germany. And by the time they're able to go really global, it's either too late or a competitor of a similar offering. So what would be your piece of advice to a lot of founders here or aspiring? When should they think global? When should they think local? How do they strike the right balance, especially in the new world?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. The first thing that a founder needs to decide is what is the market that he's addressing. And I think in Europe we have seen two models successful. There is a pan-European model and there is a global model. And a good example of a pan-European model is Doctolib. So Doctolib is a company out of France. They started by providing a booking management software for doctors, and they have evolved into becoming an operating system for doctors. Adding a lot of product, including telemedicines, PMS, etc. And they've also expanded in Germany, and they're likely going to continue to expand in Europe. But this is a play where they are going very deep into each of the markets that they're addressing. So in France, for example, they have, I think, close to 130,000 healthcare practitioners on the platform. So their market share is significant. And this is a play where you're like, I'm going to go to 50, 60, 70% market share. And if it's $1 billion market, that's already a very sizable company. And you do that in 2-3 countries in Europe, you can build like a really massive, multi-billion-dollar startup. So that's one model. The other model is more the enterprise software model, where you say, well, I want to serve the Fortune 500 companies or the SMB companies, across the world. And I would say that's where you have to start global. If you look at why, one of the reasons why UiPath has been so successful is because they're out of Bucharest. They didn't start selling into Romania. They just started to sell globally, and it was really incredible to see that these companies started to sell both in India, in Europe, and in North America and Japan very early in its life cycle. The company was less than 5 million in revenues, and they were already selling in Japan. Wow. Like who does that, right? It's just when you see that, you really see that, Daniel Dines, the founder, he really had this global, very global vision from the get-go. And that's why the company scaled super fast, because they were scaling exponentially in each of the different regions. So obviously that creates some challenges. And, I think one of the things they did very well was to rely on system integrators in each of these countries, which enabled them to actually sell to very large customers, even though they were a very small company. So when they were less than 10 million in revenue, they already signed, one of the Fortune 50 company in the US with close to $1 million contract, right? And they were like 70, 80 people company. And So that's why I think if you want to go this model, you really have to think global very early. And based on the product, you can either go for, if you have a freemium model, which is, another example is a company like Snyk, which is a security product for developer. They started with a freemium model, developed, community of developers using their product. And that was global from the get-go. Algolia was the same. It was global from the get-go because you go to the website, you don't know that it's a European company. Everything is English. You speak on the phone, you speak to English people. The internal language of the company is English. They hire people from all over the world in their offices. So being global is really a mindset. I mean, it's what we call the Silicon Valley mindset, and it can be anywhere in the world. That's why at Accel, these are the kind of founders that we're looking to invest in, and these founders with this global Silicon Valley mindset.
That's I'm just writing down. The other one is think pan-European, better think global. From the outset, because it's hard to change. We look at our own story. We were global from day one. The first 5 customers comes from 3 countries, but we still are hesitant to go to Japan yet. So I'm pretty impressed with what UiPath did. Very impressive. Now, just switching gear one more time to now, let's go into the people aspect of it, right? And now, in a COVID scenario, you see, all the startups in itself are a construction zone. Things are moving in a hustle and bustle, and it's it's always communication is more efficient in face-to-face if you're there. Suddenly, they're all let's say remote. Co-founders are remote, and many of them are young, and the processes are not that mature. What kinds of challenges that you are seeing from the people angle, and what are the winning cultural models that you're seeing that's saying, you know what, I see so many companies in my portfolio, and some of them are tackling it so admirably, and some of them are struggling with it. What are the key indicators, and what kind of guidance that you can give to the founders here about the important markers that they can internalize and implement?
Sure. I mean, hiring is key. And a lot of our portfolios continue to hire at all level during the crisis, and all this hiring is on Zoom. And on Zoom, again, it's very important to have the best hiring process, because there is no room for mistake when you're doing everything on Zoom. And I think one of the mistakes that we're seeing on hiring is people are sometimes companies are just focusing on background and skills, and they're not focusing enough on the cultural fit, which is very hard to assess, even harder to assess on Zoom. So, I would really encourage people in the hiring process to do 2 things. One is to really understand the list of the 10 key questions that they have to ask, just to make sure that from a cultural standpoint, the candidate is the right candidate. And just to illustrate this with an example, is like if one of the value of the company is grit, you can come out of the interview and say, based on the discussion, what he has done, that's what I think. But you can also ask the person the direct question is, what is the hardest thing that you've done, when you were working at this company, or even during your life, your personal life? What have you been through that's been really hard? So, going a bit outside of the normal interview framework, and try to really drill down on the personal side. So I think to me, that's one thing which is, very important. The other thing is referencing. Too many times, I've seen companies hiring people without doing the proper referencing, meaning that the candidates will give them 3 or 4 names. They're going to call these names. They're not going to ask the tough questions, or even if they do, they're the 3 names that have been referenced. So they only hear good things. They want to hire the person. They're hearing good thing. It's kind of self-reinforced, and they make the hire. And then they realize, maybe it's not working. Like, I observed this. Like, no one told me. I say, well, but did you ask the right person? Probably not. I mean, I had the one example recently of a startup that I know quite well. which hired someone from a company that I know very well and I work with. Didn't ask me for the reference. When they asked me for the reference, I gave him my candid reference. Say, okay, well, I learned something today, and it's like, well, maybe you should have done it beforehand. So to me, that's one of the things which, in this Zoom world is super important. This is really the referencing, and don't go with the people that the candidate is telling you to call them, of course, but also try to understand in their experiences what have been the hard points, who have they been working with, and can you reach out to them? And even if you reach out cold on LinkedIn, usually when you ask for a reference, people will do it. So that was, to me, I think it's one of the the key learning of this on hiring.
No, both are really important points, and I really liked, because that's one thing I wanted to ask you as well. How do you do remote hiring, and hit it head on the head. And in terms of the company culture itself, before we pivot to other topics, especially what distinguishes the great from the okay, and especially at this time, I'm talking early stage companies where people don't still think about culture. They haven't codified it, but they're probably living it in a certain way. What are the key markers that you're seeing in how they carry themselves and present to yourself and so on?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And how do you move the culture from an office environment to to working remote? It's totally different environments, and so it requires different ways to achieve it. For example, if you're in the office, most offices will have the cultures, like the key values of the company on the wall. People will wear some swag with the name of the company, some reference of the companies. All this reinforces the kind of the belonging to a group and to a culture that you don't always notice because you live in it. But certainly when you're outside of this environment, you're like, wow, how do I make sure that the people that I hire who have never been in the office, have never seen any other people in person, how do we make sure that they actually kind of learn that culture and live by that culture? And that means, I'm going back, you need processes for that. And some of the companies I've seen, and have implemented, whole hands, open questions to the CEO, where 1 hour a week, any employee can ask any question to the CEO, virtual coffees between team. I even have a company which has implemented kind of a mental health support. So they work with mental health practitioner to really identify the risk of working from home and help people through that. All these kind of small things that you need to do, but are really essential if you want the culture to be to be pervasive in a work from home environment. And I think don't underestimate people in culture, because that's what's going to make the success of a company.
Thank you, Philippe. Now, I think the audience would be upset if I don't ask this question. Fundraising to the times. In your blog, you do share a lot of tips about it. What should they do to get a good endorsement from Philippe on behalf of Accel?
Well, just start by sending me an email. So I think it's all about the in this environment. There are a lot of things that do matter, like which sector are you on, what's your product offering, do you have the right ROI model for the customers, how are your metrics, how do your metric looks like? But it's all the things that you will see in a normal fundraising process. I think on top of that, one of the things the founders have to focus on is really the trust. Because in a world where all the interactions, or most of the interactions, are on Zoom, the thing which is the most important is really the trust that you're building, kind of with the investor that you're meeting. And for that, I think one of the primary elements is really transparency. So you need to tell the good news soon, but you need to tell the bad news even sooner, because you don't want any investor to find something before you tell them when it's not good. And things happen, so people understand. But what investors are going to value most in this environment is really trust.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So I think a lot of people don't think about it. They want to present a very positive picture. Probably they say, when I say by omission, they may not say everything. They're going to paint a good picture. You're saying that's a deal breaker. It's a very good point. I just want to also, one other thing that everybody is super excited across the European ecosystem, and particularly is UiPath, and they went through phases of growth, and probably faced a lot of bottlenecks. We have some late stage company founders as well here. What are the typical bottlenecks they faced? And of course, it's a unique scenario. Everything is different, but some thematic elements that you can share that others can actually, I would say, forecast and try to get ahead of it if they're in a hyper growth mode.
Sure. Well, I think the number one thing for a company that is scaling is really the management team. And in the life cycle, if you look at the lifestyle cycle of a startup, I mean, it starts with a founding team. Mm-hmm. Typically, there are several founders, like 2, 3 founders. They will tend to operate the company as a team of 2 or 3 for quite a long time because that's their comfort zone. But at some point, you can't run a company with 2 or 3 people. At some point, you need to move to, we are 3 founders, we're friends, we decide everything together, to, well, there is a CEO, there's probably a CTO, maybe a CRO, and an exec team. And it needs to be run by the CEO. And suddenly, you need to expand this group of founders to an exec committee with a CEO. And the companies that are able to do this transition the faster are usually the companies that are scaling the faster. And the companies that are just trying to stick too much to this founding group leading the company and not leaving room to anyone else end up having a group of 3 people and then a level below of director, but they're not really leaders. And founders that can't, they haven't done it before. They can't know everything. And if they are not helped by, very senior exec who know their function very well, that's going to be a bottleneck. And so to me, the company, this is the number one success factor for a company is be able to move from founders-led to exco-led. And then the additional challenge is when you're facing hyper growth, is like every exec has, most execs, I would say, are good at taking a company from one point to the next, right? Yeah. But very few are able to take a company from the beginning to the end. Yeah. And so some people maybe don't like it. I mean, some salespeople like take a company from 1 to 15, and then after that they go back and do it again, and they don't want because they don't like from 15 to 100 is a totally different job. Yeah. And from 100 to 1 billion is also a very different job. And so the challenge is that when you're growing too fast, suddenly you're kind of skipping because you can't have a good person from 1 to 15 because if you go, I mean, UiPath went from 5 to 45 in a year, right? Wow. I mean, that's pretty, and then from 45 to 170 in 1 year. And so that's, I think, the challenge with hypergrowth is find the right level of exec at every time. And you can't be switching exec every 6 months as a company scale, right? So that's why when you're growing hyper fast, you need to really calibrate very well the seniority of the hire, because if it's someone too senior, he's not going to be hands-on enough. And if he's not senior enough, he's not going to be able to scale. And so this is really more an art than a science.
It's almost like the clothes don't fit for growing kids. If they grow too fast, you have to keep changing. How do you make sure it's stretchable, right? So 2 questions, and I want to make sure that you have just one question specifically on what's exciting for you these days. Like, what gets you excited? It's like, wow, this looks like something. Like, what are those?
Interesting. Well, so right now, these days, I'm spending a lot of time around AI and automation. Mm-hmm. I think this is an area where we're just starting to scratch the surface. And I think this includes also the low code, no code area. I think we're We're moving into a world where it's going to be much easier for people to automate processes and tasks. To have AI assisting us in our daily job. And I think the way we work today and the way we're going to work 10 years from now is going to be totally different, because a lot of the tasks where we're spending time now are just going to be automated, done by software, and we're going to really be able to focus on what is the most interesting for us. So that's one area which is I'm really passionate about. I think the other one is everything which is happening to B2B payments right now. I think we have seen with Stripe was a big revolution on the consumer payment side. And if you look at the US market, I mean, more than half of the B2B payment are done with paper checks. That's going to change in the next 10 years, maybe in the next 5 years. So we're seeing a very big opportunity there. A lot of opportunities to automate some of these payments, make them digital, be creative to offer different payment systems to companies at different sizes. I mean, Melio is a very interesting investment in this area. I mean, therefore really focusing on small businesses and try to make the payment very seamless. So if you can pay by check, by card, by anything, and the person on the other side can receive by check, by card, by the way you want. So everything is, I think that trends around B2B payments also super exciting.
What's the last company you mentioned, Philippe?
Melio.
Melio.
Yeah, it's an Israeli startup that is focusing on small businesses in North America.
Yeah, cool. So I would say I think we are almost at the top of the hour, and there's one question that another one came in, which is due to COVID-19, has VCs changed or added new parameters in assessing startups?
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
Due to COVID-19, have the VCs changed or added new parameters in assessing startups?
Oh, all right. Well, I mean, I think the one important parameter which has changed has been, I think it's obviously around the sector, which is if you're selling to hospitality right now or restaurants, obviously it's much harder. But that's an obvious one. I think the other one is the part which I mentioned earlier around kind of the optimization of the business and the metrics and where you're at, and I think there is more willingness to take less risk and invest more at a higher price in the winners than take risks and invest in companies where you see the trend, there is an improvement, but it's not there yet.
Philippe, first of all, thank you so much. I'm just going to summarize, the key themes I wrote down as, preserve cash and tighten your operations. Think pan-European or global, or hire right, and you have all the best practices on Zoom hiring and transparency when pitching, and the sectors that are there's a lot we covered, a lot of topics we covered. If you have 2 minutes, what would be your parting piece of advice or thought, or to leave the team on an uplifting note? Sure.
Well, I would say that first of all, like we're so lucky to be in tech right now. Because this is one of the sector that is, that has been the less affected by this crisis. And I would say, be bold. I think this is, even though there's a, crisis out there, sanitary crisis, for some people, an economic crisis, there are a ton of opportunities. And I think technology is one of the things that's going to help us go through this crisis as well. So while, as you said, it's important to be careful with how you invest your cash, I would say don't be shy in investing your cash where you see the opportunities. And I think this is one of the big difference between this crisis and other crises, is that there are a ton of opportunities out there. And I would encourage you to just go for it, pick the right one, and invest wisely. Fantastic. So that's a very good way to close it out. Philippe, thank you so much. Really appreciate joining despite your busy schedule. And for all the people who are listening, thank you for making this Against All Odds Summit a huge success. Look forward to repeating it next year. There you go, our moderator, Soumitra, let you to close it out.
Now, I mean, what can I say? Thank you so much, Philippe and Arun. That was a phenomenal discussion. I mean, it just leaves us, wanting to hear more. But this is the end, and I'm sure founders would go back with these insights, and they would cherish as they kind of grow in their journey. So once again, thank you so much, Philip and Arun, for giving us or leaving us all of us on a high with this closing fireside chat. And we would love to have you again next time for the next edition of Against All Odds Summit.